The Shroud of Turin contains an image of a crucified man. Is it the Lord? New evidence suggests indeed it is the Lord. Gary Stearman is here to discuss with me new evidence on the Shroud of Turin.
And J.R., as we mentioned on our last broadcast, in the Jerusalem Post of April 26, 1997, there came a startling new word. The Jerusalem Post, of all places, featuring an article on the back page concerning new images found on the Shroud of Turin. 28 species of flowers and plants native to the area between Jerusalem and Jericho have been found emblazoned on the shroud as if by some mysterious photographic process. And in this country, Professor Dr. Alan Hwanger of Duke University, who is a medical lecturer, retired, working with Avinoam Danin, a botanist from Hebrew University, studied images of the flowers on the shroud, and J.R., there they were, big as life. And this is a greatly interesting story to me.
According to the Gospel of John, chapter 19 and verse 40, the Bible says they took the body of Jesus and wound it in linen clothes with the spices. And in verse 39 it says, there came Nicodemus, which at the first came to Jesus by night and brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100-pound weight. And verse 41 says, now in the place where he was crucified there was a garden. So perhaps from this garden they picked the flowers and the other plants that they placed around the body in the tomb. And these appear right on the shroud.
They appear on the shroud, mostly around the head of the figure, the head and shoulders. One of the flowers, which is called a chrysanthemum coronarium, blooms in the time frame of April-May. And in fact, all of the 28 species, well, let me back up just a little bit. Of the 28 species, there are many flowers represented, and virtually all the flowers identified bloom in this March-April time frame.
At Passover.
At Passover, which of course is the time of Jesus' burial. They would be in bloom. They'd be fresh. They'd, as J.R. mentioned a moment ago, they might have been picked right out of that garden that was nearby, the site of his crucifixion.
Let's put a picture of this image of the flower on the shroud up. Now, if you'll notice, let's put an outline of the flower around the image so that you can fasten your eyes on the spot where you will see the flower. Now, as we fade out the drawn image, you can see the image literally photographed into the fiber with some kind of a heat process.
Yeah.
This is absolutely incredible, Gary.
Well, J.R., these are very difficult images to see, but as you just noticed, once you know where to look, they're there, very faint. Historical evidence is that they used to be much darker than they are right now. In fact, medieval artists, and before the medieval era, actually painted pictures of Christ reputedly from the shroud, and they featured little flowers around his head. So those flowers apparently used to be much brighter than they are right now.
And so we must ask the question, how did these images get on the shroud? Tests have been made in laboratories with a Tesla coil. Electrostatic energy has been used. Gary, let's talk about that for a moment.
Yeah, anytime you have high voltage, high frequency power, electricity, it produces what's called a coronal discharge. That is to say, around the source there will be an electrical field generated which is capable of transmitting quite a bit of heat. And it's almost like a light source in a way, except that it behaves differently. And some have speculated that this is the kind of discharge that put the image on the cloth.
So we have not only an image of a man, but this same light that emanated from within the Savior at the very instant of resurrection also, attached itself to the foliage around him, and the whole thing glowed. This must have been really miraculous.
The laws of physics are, I suppose, would hold in the shroud just as well as in any other place. And what we seem to have here is a high-energy coronal discharge which would have charged all the objects that were near the body.
As well as the body.
As well as the body itself. And this field of energy, this coronal discharge as it's called, goes across the surface of an object. Not into the object, but across the surface. and thereby would transmit the image of the object to the cloth.
Fascinating.
Oh, it is fascinating.
In fact, tests have been made using a Tesla coil and high energy, electrostatic energy, and have actually been able to produce the image of a bouquet of flowers on a cloth through using this coronal energy. So, and of course, this is new. This is technology of this generation, not of generations past. No way this could have been done, or anyone known how to do it in ages past.
And speaking of ages past, very quickly we mentioned, as we did on our last broadcast, that the shroud has been traced through pollen studies, through historical studies, various other kinds of studies, has been historically traced back to Jerusalem around 300 AD. There's a rather steady track of its existence that can be followed. Now, JR, in addition to a coronal discharge, the image, which is a surface sort of energy, the shroud image seems to have another kind of energy, an energy that came from within the figure of the body on the shroud, producing what almost might be called an X-ray effect.
Yes. Let's look at the face for a few moments. The face on the Shroud of Turin has been placed alongside the image of a face X-ray. You can see the skull, you can see the cavities. Let's zoom in closer on the teeth and the sinus cavities around the eyes and nose and what have you. Explain this, Gary.
Well, as we look at this face, now on the right side of your screen in green is a modern X-ray of a skull. On the left side, compared with it, is the image on the shroud. And you'll notice to the left and right side of the nose are two dark spots. These correspond to the maxillary facial sinuses. Also the bones, commonly called the cheekbones, which register both on the X-ray and on the image, are clearly visible. The nasal cavity is visible. And then, most interesting to me, JR, as you move down the area of the mouth, on the green modern X-ray, you can see teeth along with their roots. Carefully looking at the shroud side, you notice, maybe for the first time, that there are teeth that appear on the image of the shroud, suggesting an internal illumination of the body. I had never seen these before in my life. I'd looked at that image, but until Dr. Wanger actually compared and demonstrated the existence of those teeth, I'd never seen them.
What can we say? It's really awesome. You can actually see down here on the shroud teeth with the roots going down into the gums on the lower jaw area, and also in the upper teeth as well. These teeth appear, as well as the mustache, and then there are the sinus cavities. You can actually see the dark areas following the very design that you can see in that X-ray. So what we have here is an X-ray as well as a photograph. So the light had to emanate from within, and scorch the fibers of the cloth, producing such an image. Must have been a tremendous. And it's interesting to me that John chapter 1 says, "In him was life, and this life was the light," or this light. In him was light. This light was the life of men. So there's some kind of a life involved in this glory. What can we call it? The Shekinah?
Yeah, Shekinah glory. You know, the New Jerusalem will be illuminated by the Lamb, as we read in Revelation 21:23. The Lamb is the light thereof. He's got to be brilliant beyond description. Now, going a little farther along, as we look at the area on the shroud of the hands, which are crossed in front of the body, many times looking at these images, we've noticed the fingers seem very long. Well, those are not fingers. Actually, what we're seeing are the bones of the hand superimposed here in this picture with a modern X-ray view of a hand. The white or light spot in the X-ray is the image of where a spike would be driven through the wrist. Corresponds to the dark blood stain on the shroud hands, but you see the bones in the hand very clearly, and if you look closely, you can even see joints and articulations. And we have another view, too, showing a close-up of the hands crossed before the body, superimposed with this X-ray hand, JR. And what's astounding here is as you bring up the x-ray of the hand, we have superimposed or added a little yellow rectangle where a spike would be driven through the hand. And as you go back to the view of the x-ray on the shroud, you see a blood stain exactly where that spike would be driven.
And Gary, you can see the arm bones.
Yes, you can.
Attached to the wrist bony area and the cartilage and the divisions between the bones. It is absolutely an x-ray of the hand.
Absolutely. And what we have to show you from beyond, in views yet to come, I think is even more astounding. Look at this x-ray view.
The Shroud of Turin also has some incredible photographs of coins on the eyes of the crucified man. Gary, this dates the time right to the death of Christ, doesn't it?
It really does. Now, if coins on the eyes seem odd, it was the custom in that period to close the eyes and place coins on them. And the coin in question here is the lepton, which is called in the Bible a mite, a very tiny little coin. And the particular coin is the Pontius Pilate lepton, which was minted in 29 A.D. Now, that much is very well known. And it contains the name of Tiberius Caesar, or the abbreviation of Tiberius Caesar.
According to Luke chapter 3, when John the Baptist began his ministry, the scripture says, beginning in verse 1, "Now in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, Pontius Pilate being governor of Judea, and Herod the Tetrarch of Galilee," and so on and so on and so on. So we have here Tiberius Caesar as the ruler of Rome. And around this coin, let's put a picture of this coin on the screen. This one is collected from archaeological digs, I suppose. You'll notice the shepherd's crook, or the shepherd's staff, in the center of the coin. You will also note this in the coin on the eye. And then up around the perimeters of this coin, Tiberius Caesar. In fact, if you'll look very carefully about the 10 o'clock position, you can see the C and the A and the I.
That's right. On what we're looking at here is this is the coin with around the left-hand edge you see lettering, and here you're looking at a computerized enhancement of the shroud image of the coin over the eye. And if you look very carefully, the upper left hand, as J.R. said, about the 10 o'clock position, you'll see a C and an A and an I. Now, without computer imaging, it would be impossible to make this verification. But, J.R., there are over 100 points of comparison
between the coin and
the
shroud image.
And the shroud image.
Just around the coin itself.
Yeah, far more than I would say be adequate for fingerprint identification. I think 14 points is usually considered adequate for fingerprint identification.
How did the image of this coin get on the shroud?
Well, now there is a question. We've been talking about coronal discharge. Dr. Hwanger and others have studied methods. For one thing, they just simply tried heating a coin, placing it on linen. And they did get a shroud image by doing that, by heating a coin with 50 watt seconds of electric energy and then placing it on the shroud. They got a nice
placing
image.
it on a cloth.
On a cloth.
And we're able to get a transfer of the image of the coin onto the cloth by using heat.
Right, just plain heat, heating the coin. But they also used high voltage, high frequency electricity, Tesla coil type electricity, 20,000 electron volts applied for 1/10 of a second, produced a beautiful, perfect image of a coin on cloth. So it seems obvious the way the image was made.
Amazing.
Yeah.
This is really incredible. Now let's talk about something else that I think is really fascinating. The face cloth, called the sudarium in Greek. The napkin of John chapter 21. Believe it or not, such a cloth exists today in a church in Italy. The Cathedral of Oviedo in the city of
Oviedo in Spain.
Oviedo in Spain, I'm sorry, in Spain. And this sudarium was placed, a photograph of it, of the face itself, was placed to compare the bloodstains on the cloth with the bloodstains on the shroud. Gary, tell us about it.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, this sudarium is we find this in John 20, verse 7, where it says, "And the napkin that was about his head, not lying with the linen clothes, but wrapped together and placed by itself." This word for napkin in Greek is sudarion, or sudarium in Latin. And J.R., the sudarium of Oviedo has long been thought to be this cloth wrapped laterally around the head and then folded back. And when the body was laid on it, blood from the back of the head formed a stain, which corresponds to the blood stains on the shroud.
Yes.
And that's astonishing to note that this piece of cloth has existed all these years, and there it is in the Cathedral of Oviedo in Spain. We have a comparison image that we can show too. If we could pull that image up on the screen, here is the image.
This is of the nose and the mouth
area.
And the mustache.
Mustache area.
Okay.
This is on the sudarium. Here is the shroud image. Again, this showing the nose and mustache area, which was very bloody. He had been beaten, the image on the shroud. The man had been beaten. As we go back to the image on the sudarium, you can see blood stains in the nose area, the nasal area. The nose had been broken. The mustache was bloodied. And so we have a correspondence, a perfect correspondence of staining between the sudarium of Oviedo and the Shroud of Turin.
And we also have a contusion above the eyebrow, right on the eyebrow, above the, would that be the right eye?
Of the right eye on the shroud,
and
which
you
is
can
the left
see it
side.
on both claws. I mean, it's bloodstain for bloodstain. It absolutely is there. They match. And what's so fascinating is this sudarium exists to this very day.
To this very day. Now, the back of this was the front view of the sudarium, but the sudarium or napkin wrapped around behind the head, and when the head laid on it, blood pooled at the back of the head, went through the napkin apparently and onto the shroud, producing an identical image on both pieces of cloth. And we have that comparison too. If we could pull it up, here's the sudarium view. You can see in the middle to lower right a rather ragged blood stain. As we compare this with the image on the back of the head on the shroud, we see the same blood stain, the same place. Again, going back to the sudarium, there is a ragged blood stain that trails off down toward the bottom. We have the crown of thorns, blood marks, and the blood stain here on the shroud.
That's amazing. Not only that, but there was the titulus, the wooden plaque with the words "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews" in 3 languages. And according to history, this was located by the mother of Constantine in the 4th century when she went to Jerusalem. She had this thing divided up into 3 pieces. One piece was left in Jerusalem, another sent to Constantinople, and then another piece of this titulus was taken to Rome. And it still exists to this day.
Yeah.
That's what's so amazing about it.
It exists in a church called the Basilica de Santa Croce Jerusalem, which means the Basilica of the Holy Cross in Jerusalem. That's the name of the basilica. It's located in Rome, and the fragment of the sign is 5.2 inches tall by 9.2 inches wide. It's in a silver reliquary frame. And J.R., what's astounding is that Dr. Hwanger has found an image. And if we could pull that image up, we have just a short time.
He found the image of the titulus on the cloth. So it evidently was taken down from the cross. When Jesus was buried, it was placed alongside his the lower leg on the cloth, and the very lettering appears Tell us about that.
Yeah,
Gary.
we have here, you can clearly see the letter alpha. It looks like an English A right in the middle of the screen on the titulus.
From the word Nazareth.
From the word Nazareth.
Jesus of Nazareth.
And then as you pull back out to the shroud, you can see the very faint A on the shroud.
The same letter.
The same letter.
It came off of that board.
And these letters are very, very faint, but you can make out most of the letters of the word Nazareth on the shroud.
So
it corresponds to the sign.
So that very board was under that very cloth at
Yes.
the moment of resurrection.
Amazing.
Wow. We'll be back in just a moment.